Agatha Raisin and the Fatal Flower Show. Good evening from our little village, where news spreads faster than the mail.
I'm curious, where in the world are you tuning in from today?
We absolutely love hearing from listeners near and far. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss the next bit of mischief unfolding. Chapter 1. A Blooming Surprise in Carsely. Agatha Raisin stepped off the bus, her sensible heels clicking against the worn stones of Carsley's main street. The village looked as quaint as ever, cottages lined with neat flower boxes, smoke curling lazily from chimneys, and the scent of morning dew mingling with freshly baked bread from the bakery. Yet something felt different. There was an unusual buzz in the air, a subtle tension woven into the otherwise peaceful village rhythm. She adjusted her light beige coat and took in the scene. Colourful bunting fluttered between lampposts, and small clusters of villagers hurried about, carrying crates of flowers and folding tables, all with the precise efficiency of people accustomed to annual routines, but with a sharper edge, a slight briskness she hadn't noticed before. Agatha's gaze fell on the village green, already dotted with freshly mown grass and neatly trimmed hedges. Stalls were being erected, ribbons strung, and prize boards propped against wooden easels. Local gardeners greeted each other with polite smiles, but she caught the occasional narrowed eye, a whispered word exchanged behind gloved hands, and a few quiet frowns that spoke of rivalries long simmering beneath polite conversation. Her lips curved into a knowing smile. Nothing in Carsely happened without undercurrents, and the flower show had always been a battlefield beneath the surface of charm. It wasn't long before her attention shifted to a newcomer who stood out among the familiar faces. Victor Lark, a tall man with dark, wavy hair and a crisp yet casual jacket, moved confidently between flower displays, adjusting petals and tilting heads of arrangements with meticulous care. He had a way of smiling that seemed effortlessly charming, yet there was something guarded in his eyes, a flicker of secrecy that intrigued Agatha immediately. She noted the subtle tension he created, not by malice, but by the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing, and the attention it drew from the villagers. Curiosity piqued. She wandered closer to one of the displays Victor had arranged. The flowers were mostly impeccable, their vibrant colours drawing the eye. Yet there was one blossom that caught her attention, a small, wilted rose tucked incongruously into the otherwise perfect arrangement. It was subtle, easy to miss, yet it whispered a story, hinting that not all was as polished as it seemed. Agatha's mind ticked over possibilities. Could it be a careless mistake or a deliberate misstep meant to mask something else? As she strolled further, she recognized several villagers from past shows, Mrs. Pritchard fussing over her ribbon daisies with the precision of a general inspecting troops, Mr. Tilling muttering under his breath as he adjusted the stakes for his prize-winning tulips, and young Sophie Henderson darting about nervously, clearly eager to impress but conscious of older eyes upon her work. Each interaction, each glimmer of discontent or excitement layered the morning with tension and curiosity.
Agatha smiled inwardly at the spectacle.
Every year the same routines, but this year felt different. She paused near the fountain, the soft gurgle of water mixing with the murmur of conversation, and sipped her tea from a small thermos she had brought. Observing the scene, Agatha allowed herself a quiet thrill. A new competitor, subtle rivalries, whispered secrets, and one odd wilted flower. She already sensed that this flower show would be memorable. Carsely had awakened, and so had her curiosity. With a final glance at Victor, adjusting a particularly perfect rose, Agatha began walking through the village green, notebook tucked under her arm. Something told her that beneath the charm and cheerful smiles, a little intrigue was blooming, and she intended to uncover it. Agatha Raisin stepped deeper into the flower show grounds, notebook tucked under her arm, enjoying the cheerful hum of the village in full swing. Children darted between flower beds, their laughter mingling with the soft chatter of neighbours and the occasional clink of teacups from the refreshment stall. She waved to a few familiar faces, Mrs. Pritchard fussing over her ribbons, Mr. Tilling inspecting the soil near his tulips, but it was the small irregularities that caught her eye. A form had gone missing from the entry table, leaving a gap where an expected participant should have been. She made a mental note, her curiosity piqued. The greenhouse nearby gleamed in the morning sun, its glass panels spotless, almost unnaturally so. Agatha approached slowly, noting the faint reflection of someone moving within. A hush of conversation came from behind the door, punctuated by quick gestures and the occasional sharp word. She couldn't hear the full exchange, but the tone hinted at disagreement, perhaps even an argument, between two of the competitors. Agatha tilted her head thoughtfully. Minor tensions were common, yet this felt different. There was an undercurrent of something more deliberate, an energy that whispered at hidden motives beneath the polite surface. As she wandered among the flower beds, Agatha paused to examine a carefully arranged display of roses. Their colours were rich and perfectly groomed, each petal aligned as though placed by invisible hands. Yet she noticed a subtle irregularity. One label was slightly askew, another flower seemed out of place. A gardener brushing past muttered something under his breath about someone meddling again, and Agatha's eyebrows lifted. The tiniest discrepancy could reveal a hidden story, and she was eager to trace it. Her attention shifted toward a cluster of villagers gathered near the edge of the greenhouse. Whispers floated through the air, comments about who might win, who might cheat, and even speculation about the newcomer. Victor Lark. Agatha observed them carefully, noting the subtle exchanges, a raised eyebrow, a slight frown, a hand lingering on a prize ribbon for a fraction too long. Every gesture seemed charged with silent rivalry. She sipped her tea, smiling at the quiet theatricality of village life. To outsiders it might appear trivial, but to someone accustomed to reading subtle cues, it was a story unfolding before her eyes. Then her gaze returned to Victor. He stood slightly apart from the others, leaning over a neighbour's rose display with an intensity that made Agatha pause. His fingers hovered just above the petals, tracing the contours without touching them, eyes narrowed as though memorizing every detail. He seemed almost too focused, a level of attention that went beyond admiration. Agatha's mind worked quickly. Was he simply enthusiastic about horticulture, or was there something more calculating behind that careful scrutiny? The thought sent a tiny thrill down her spine. Nearby, Sophie Henderson approached Agatha with a nervous smile, pointing out a misplaced ribbon on her daffodil display.
"I don't know what happened," she whispered.
"I was sure everything was perfect this morning." Agatha nodded sympathetically, her mind already cataloguing the possibilities. Small mistakes, deliberate tampering, or the overzealous interest of a newcomer. Each detail mattered. As the sun climbed higher, Agatha moved toward the central aisle, notebook open and pen poised. She observed the villagers, the flowers, the faint tensions, and especially Victor, whose gaze still lingered on another gardener's roses with the same precise intensity. A seed of doubt had taken root. Nothing seemed entirely ordinary, and Agatha knew this flower show would require careful attention. With a small, satisfied smile, she prepared to follow the trail of whispers, anomalies, and subtle intrigues that promised to make this event anything but predictable. Chapter 2. Secrets Among the Petals. Agatha Raisin paused at the greenhouse entrance, the morning sun casting a soft glow over the glass panes. From outside, she could hear muted voices, low enough that the words were mostly indistinct, but the tone carried a sharp edge. Curiosity tugged at her as she leaned closer, pretending to inspect the potted ferns along the outer path. Inside, Victor Lark and a local gardener, Mr. Havisham, a man known for his competitiveness, stood near the far corner, their heads close together. Victor's posture was relaxed, but his eyes were alert, scanning the room with an intensity that immediately set Agatha's mind racing. She adjusted her coat and took a careful step closer. noting the subtle details of the greenhouse interior. Rows of meticulously arranged plants glowed in the soft light filtering through the glass. The rare orchid, the coveted prize, sat on a raised pedestal, its petals a flawless gradient from deep violet at the center to soft lilac at the edges. Tiny droplets of water clung to the surface, reflecting the sunlight like miniature crystals.
Agatha felt a thrill of anticipation.
The flower was exquisite, almost ethereal, a living jewel that promised prestige as much as monetary reward. Whoever possessed it would command attention and envy alike. Victor leaned toward Mr. Havisham, speaking in measured tones. Agatha couldn't catch the exact words, but she caught fragments. Must ensure.
And no mistakes.
His gestures were subtle but pointed, and the tension between them was unmistakable. Mr. Havisham shifted uneasily, hands gripping a clipboard, and muttered something under his breath.
Agatha's brow arched.
There was more at stake here than a simple competition. She could sense ambition and calculation behind their words, the unspoken weight of rivalry and opportunity. Moving slightly,
Agatha's keen eye caught a faint smudge on the edge of the orchid's display table.
a mark that could have been accidental or a sign of early tampering. She tucked this into her mental inventory of clues, aware that the smallest detail often revealed the largest truths. Nearby, another competitor fussed over her begonias, shooting wary glances at Victor.
Agatha noted the subtle exchange, a nod here, a whispered word there.
Each interaction was a brushstroke in the larger canvas of village intrigue. Victor's focus returned to the rare orchid, and he lifted a magnifying lens, examining every petal with precision. Agatha's curiosity heightened. He seemed almost reverent, yet the scrutiny was exacting, calculating. Was he ensuring the orchid's perfection, or was he assessing how it might compare to his own entries? Agatha jotted quick notes in her notebook. Victor, attention to detail, possibly strategic. A sudden creak from a greenhouse door made her pause. A young assistant appeared, carrying a small tray of fertilizer, eyes wide as if sensing the tension. Victor straightened, his expression shifting into easy charm, but his glance toward Mr. Havisham lingered just a fraction too long. Agatha recognized the subtle signals of control and influence, the invisible dance of competition. She felt her pulse quicken, not from fear, but from the thrill of being a silent observer of the unfolding strategy. Taking a step back, Agatha allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Her investigative instincts had kicked in fully. Between Victor's precise movements, Mr. Havisham's taut posture, and the rare orchid's imperious presence, she could already sense that this flower show held secrets beyond the ordinary. Every glance, every hushed phrase, hinted at ambition, envy, and careful planning. Agatha felt the familiar thrill of the chase, not a hunt for danger, but a pursuit of truth hidden in the petals and whispers of Carsley's most prestigious floral event. She made a note to return later, to observe more closely and perhaps speak discreetly with the villagers who lingered near the greenhouse doors. For now, she retreated along the gravel path, notebook in hand, savoring the tension and anticipation that pulsed through the air. The rare orchid had revealed its stakes, and Agatha knew she was in the midst of a story worth following. Agatha Raisin wandered among the neatly arranged garden beds, her eyes scanning every detail with a practiced intensity. The morning sun cast gentle shadows across the rows of tulips and dahlias, illuminating tiny imperfections that would escape an untrained eye. Her steps were careful, soft against the grass, as she crouched to examine the soil. Footprints, irregular and slightly muddy, led from one plot to another, suggesting someone had moved deliberately through the beds. They were too large to belong to the children darting about earlier, and too precise to be accidental. Her gaze fell on a broken trowel lying near a row of begonias. Its handle had snapped cleanly, as if in frustration or haste, and a small smear of dirt marked the spot where it had been discarded.
Agatha picked it up carefully, noting the fingerprints smudged along its worn surface.
Someone had used it recently, and the breakage was not likely a simple accident. She replaced it gently and continued her inspection, moving between the flower beds with quiet purpose. Labels were another source of concern. One identifying a particularly radiant rose had been shifted slightly, not enough to be immediately noticeable, but enough to confuse judges who relied on precision. Another small card, meant to mark a violet, had been turned backward, hiding the name from view.
Agatha frowned thoughtfully.
These small details suggested more than carelessness. Someone was interfering, perhaps testing the boundaries of decorum in Carsley's usually orderly competition. Near the central display of rare orchids, she spotted something that made her heart skip. A folded note, half hidden beneath a leaf, fluttered slightly in the morning breeze. Agatha reached for it carefully, unfolding a small piece of paper on which a few words had been hastily written. "Watch carefully. Look beyond the petals." She smiled faintly. Someone wanted to be noticed, or perhaps wanted her to notice. Her mind raced with possibilities, and she tucked the note into her notebook for later analysis. Meanwhile, her attention was drawn back to Victor Lark. He moved methodically through the garden, adjusting blooms with the same meticulous attention she had observed in the greenhouse. His expression was calm, almost serene, yet there was an intensity to his gaze that set him apart from the other gardeners. He lingered longer than necessary on a neighbour's prize-winning roses, his hands hovering above the petals before retracting.
Agatha tilted her head.
Was it admiration, professional critique, or something more calculating? She couldn't be certain, and the ambiguity only heightened her curiosity. As she continued along the winding paths, Agatha took mental notes of the villagers' reactions. Mrs. Pritchard, perpetually confident in her daisies, glanced repeatedly at her neighbours, fingers twitching toward a ribbon, and Mr. Tilling muttered under his breath as he adjusted stakes for his tulips. Even Sophie Henderson, nervous and eager, paused mid-step, glancing toward Victor before continuing with her arrangements. Each movement, each glance, seemed to suggest unspoken alliances, rivalries, and tensions. Agatha's notebook quickly filled with sketches of footprints, diagrams of the displaced labels, and observations of Victor's measured movements. She felt the familiar thrill of discovery, piecing together subtle evidence, connecting one small anomaly to another, and watching patterns emerge where others saw only flowers. The garden, she realized, was more than a display of horticultural skill. It was a stage for intentions, ambitions, and secrets. By the time she stood near the edge of the rose border, notebook full and senses alert, Agatha had formed a preliminary theory. Someone was deliberately interfering, though the motive remained unclear. And Victor Lark, with his precise, enigmatic behavior, was central to her observations. Yet she reminded herself to wait, to watch quietly, and let the garden reveal its stories in its own time. One thing was certain: beneath the colourful blooms, intrigue was thriving, and Agatha Raisin intended to uncover it. Chapter 3: Roses and Rivalries. Agatha Raisin stepped into the sunlit garden, where the village's annual post-flower show party was in full swing. The scent of freshly cut grass mingled with the perfume of roses and lavender, creating a heady, comforting aroma that immediately eased her into a relaxed, observant mood. Tables draped with white cloths bore trays of pastries, dainty sandwiches, and silver teapots that gleamed under the late morning sun. Children chased one another around the hedges, squeals of delight punctuating the murmur of conversation, while adults mingled in clusters, exchanging polite gossip, sly smiles, and subtle barbs. Agatha began with a friendly wave to Mrs. Pritchard, who was fussing over her meticulously arranged daisy display nearby. "I see the tulips didn't overshadow your daisies this year," Agatha remarked, a hint of amusement in her voice. Mrs. Pritchard's lips pursed briefly, but her eyes twinkled with competitive pride. "Indeed," she said crisply. "Some of us take our victories seriously." Her tone carried the faintest edge, the kind of playful rivalry that had defined the flower show for years.
Agatha smiled inwardly.
Village politics, she knew, were often more intricate than the blooms themselves. Victor Lark moved through the party with a quiet confidence that drew attention without demanding it. He greeted neighbours with polite nods and measured compliments, his dark hair catching the sunlight and his presence subtly commanding the space. Agatha watched him from a distance, noting the careful way he assessed each display. His attention to detail, coupled with a faintly secretive air, reminded her that he was more than a casual participant. Yet he carried it lightly, as if confident in both his charm and his discretion. Nearby, Mr. Tilling and a young gardener, Sophie Henderson, were engaged in a lively debate over who had grown the largest tulip bulbs. The conversation teetered between genuine admiration and friendly one-upmanship, while Agatha observed the small inconsistencies in their accounts. Sophie's story of a perfectly timed watering contradicted a detail Mr. Tilling mentioned. She tucked the discrepancies into her mental notes. In Carsely, nothing was ever entirely straightforward. Agatha wandered toward the refreshment table, accepting a cup of tea from a grinning attendant. As she sipped, a small folded piece of paper was slipped into her hand without a word. Curious, she unfolded it discreetly, revealing a hastily written message. "Watch the blooms closely." Her eyebrows lifted, and a quiet thrill ran through her. The tip was anonymous, yet it carried the unmistakable weight of caution. Someone wanted her attention, and the warning confirmed her suspicions that subtle mischief had begun. The garden buzzed with soft laughter and gentle chatter, yet beneath the conviviality, Agatha detected minor tension. Mrs. Pritchard cast furtive glances at a nearby display of lilacs, while Mr. Havisham's jaw tightened as he adjusted a ribbon on his prize-winning roses. Even Sophie's smile faltered as she noticed Victor observing her blooms.
Agatha noted the way gestures and glances spoke volume.
Each movement layered with hints of pride, envy, and subtle competitiveness. At the edge of the rose border, Victor paused, kneeling slightly to examine a particularly vibrant bloom. His fingers hovered above the petals, eyes narrowing as he traced each curve without touching them. Agatha's notebook came to life with quick sketches and shorthand observations, documenting gestures, subtle expressions, and irregularities she'd spotted. The intensity of his scrutiny, combined with the minor tensions among villagers, painted a picture of carefully orchestrated interactions, small details that, together, suggested an emerging pattern. As the afternoon wore on, Agatha moved gracefully between clusters of villagers, exchanging polite words and taking careful mental notes. Every laugh, every whispered comment, every fleeting look contributed to the intricate social tapestry she observed. By the time she paused under the shade of a magnolia tree, notebook filled and pen poised, Agatha had already begun to connect the threads. The flower show might have been a festival of blooms, but beneath the petals, the seeds of intrigue were clearly taking root. With a quiet, satisfied smile, she folded the anonymous note and slipped it into her pocket. Her eyes flicked toward Victor once more, kneeling over the roses, and she thought wryly that this garden party, with its mix of charm and subtle tension, was only just beginning to reveal its secrets. Agatha Raisin had just stepped away from the refreshment table,
notebook in hand, when a sudden gasp rippled through the crowd.
She turned toward the rose display near the garden centre and saw a small group of villagers gathered in a tight circle, faces pale and eyes wide. Pushing gently through, she caught sight of the source, a prized rose, its velvety crimson petals crushed and smeared against the soft soil. The delicate arrangement had been trampled, and the shock of the scene cast a momentary hush across the garden. "Oh, my goodness!" Mrs. Pritchard exclaimed, wringing her hands, her face a mix of horror and indignation.
"How could anyone do such a thing?"
Her voice quivered, though there was an unmistakable glimmer of curiosity beneath the outrage. Mr. Tilling bent to inspect the flower, muttering under his breath about carelessness and potential sabotage. Even Sophie Henderson clutched her apron nervously, casting wary glances at nearby villagers as though expecting someone to confess immediately. Agatha moved closer, careful to keep her distance while observing. She noted the positions and expressions of everyone present. Victor Lark stood slightly apart, arms folded, his gaze flicking between the trampled petals and the faces of the shocked gardeners. He seemed calm, almost detached, yet there was a peculiar intensity in his eyes, as if he were calculating possibilities rather than reacting with surprise. Agatha's curiosity piqued. His demeanor, she thought, was worth remembering. She crouched near the rose, careful not to disturb the evidence, and examined the soil. The footprints were subtle but discernible, small, neat shoe prints pressed into the earth, suggesting deliberate placement rather than a random stumble. A small leaf, torn from a neighboring bloom, lay nearby, and a smudge of mud marked the edge of a path. Agatha jotted notes quickly, recording each detail, aware that the smallest evidence might reveal a motive or a method. Turning her attention to the villagers, she began her quiet mental inventory. Mrs. Pritchard's hands trembled slightly, yet her eyes darted toward the other displays, as though assessing blame. Mr. Tilling's brow furrowed, lips moving in silent calculations, while Sophie's glance toward Victor betrayed both nervousness and fascination. Agatha observed the subtle contradictions in their statements. Mrs. Pritchard claimed she hadn't left her daisies unattended, yet a ribbon on her own display was slightly askew. Mr. Tilling insisted he had been inspecting a different bed entirely, yet his footprints matched a path leading toward the trampled rose. The crowd buzzed with whispers, theories, and gentle accusations, each voice adding a layer of intrigue without descending into true alarm. Agatha made small observations with methodical care. The way villagers shifted weight from foot to foot, the tiny gestures of avoidance or attention, the brief meeting of eyes that spoke volumes. Each movement contributed to her growing map of suspicion and possible motives. Then, from the periphery, a small scrap of paper floated onto the grass. Agatha bent to pick it up, noting that it bore a hastily written message. "Not everything is as it seems." She tucked it into her notebook, her mind already connecting it to the earlier anonymous tip she had received. Someone clearly wanted her attention, and the sequence of events seemed increasingly deliberate. By the time the commotion settled, Agatha had compiled a detailed account of what she had seen: the trampled rose, the footprints, the expressions and conflicting statements of villagers, and Victor's enigmatic posture. She allowed herself a faint smile. Each clue, each subtle contradiction, was a thread in the intricate tapestry of the flower show's hidden drama. As the villagers returned to their own displays, murmuring in relief and curiosity, Agatha remained crouched near the rose. She felt the familiar thrill of investigation, a quiet satisfaction in observing, deducing, and anticipating. One thing was certain: beneath the cheerful veneer of the garden party, intrigue was flourishing, and she intended to uncover it, petal by petal. Chapter 4. A Thorny Discovery. Agatha Raisin lay awake in her bedroom, the moonlight spilling softly through the lace curtains. The quiet of Carsely at night was usually comforting, yet sleep eluded her. Her thoughts drifted to the trampled rose, the misplaced labels, and the subtle tensions she had observed at the flower show. Something felt unresolved, an invisible thread pulling her curiosity toward the greenhouse. Slipping into her coat and grabbing a small flashlight, she left her house quietly, her footsteps soft against the cobbled stones. The village was hushed, a gentle fog curling around the cottages and garden walls.
Agatha's heart beat steadily, not with fear, but with anticipation.
She approached the greenhouse, the glass panels reflecting the moonlight like silvered mirrors.
A faint rustle of leaves and the scent of moist earth reached her before she even saw movement.
She crouched behind a rose bush, the petals brushing lightly against her coat, and trained her eyes on the greenhouse. Inside, a shadowy figure moved among the plants.
Agatha could not make out features, only the glint of gloves, careful, deliberate gestures as the person adjusted stems and leaves.
The gloves were distinctive, dark leather with tiny perforations along the fingers, worn but well maintained. The figure paused occasionally, inhaling deeply as though savouring the scents of the blooms. Agatha herself caught the faint aroma, a mixture of jasmine and damp soil punctuated by the sharp tang of fertilizer. Her senses sharpened. Every detail could be a clue. The figure's movements were precise, almost ritualistic. Pots were shifted slightly, stakes straightened, petals brushed gently aside.
Agatha noted the subtle care with which the plants were handled.
This was no ordinary intruder. This was someone familiar with horticulture, someone who understood the plants and their importance. She crouched lower, careful not to breathe too loudly, and allowed her eyes to follow each action. A faint shuffle of boots and a muted sigh punctuated the silence of the night, heightening the tension without fear. A small piece of paper fluttered near a table, and the shadowy figure paused, bending to pick it up before slipping it into a pocket. Agatha's curiosity deepened. Was this person leaving a message for someone? Or perhaps retrieving evidence they didn't want discovered? The possibilities swirled in her mind as she catalogued each gesture. Every move seemed meaningful, yet the figure's identity remained hidden behind the darkness. The moonlight shifted across the greenhouse floor, illuminating the occasional smudge on the tiles and the soft sway of plants disturbed by the intruder's passage. Agatha inhaled the mixture of scents again, committing them to memory. The earthy aroma, the sweet perfume of flowers, and the faint tang of gloves worn long enough to carry a human signature. Her investigative instincts hummed. She was piecing together a sensory map, one that might reveal the person behind the midnight visitations. Time seemed to stretch as she watched the figure linger near the rare orchid display, hands hovering just above the petals without touching them. The shadow shifted, turned, and finally, after what felt like hours, slipped silently toward the greenhouse door. Agatha waited until the figure disappeared into the foggy night before emerging from her hiding spot. She paused under a magnolia tree, notebook ready, recording every detail, the gloves, the scents, the deliberate movements, the careful handling of the plants. The greenhouse had offered more than shadows. It had revealed intention, precision, and secrecy. Agatha smiled faintly, savouring the thrill. The mystery was deepening, and she had gathered vital clues without confrontation. As she walked home through the silent village, the moonlight highlighting the dew-laden cobblestones, she felt a quiet satisfaction. Carsely at night, with its hidden movements and faint aromas, had whispered its secrets to her. She knew that the shadowy figure would appear in her thoughts again, each detail a puzzle piece to be examined in the light of day. Tonight, the intrigue had begun to bloom. Agatha Raisin arrived at the flower show grounds early the next morning, the air crisp and filled with the delicate scent of dew-kissed blooms. The village was unusually quiet, an expectant hush settling over the cobbled streets. As she approached the greenhouse, she noticed small groups of villagers huddled near the entrance, their faces pale and whispers taut with concern. Something was amiss. A gentle murmur of alarm rippled through the crowd.
Agatha's eyes immediately sought the rare orchid.
It was gone. The raised pedestal, which had showcased the exquisite violet and lilac bloom, now stood empty. A single droplet of water lingered on the table, catching the morning light. The absence of the orchid created a strange void among the carefully arranged plants, drawing attention to the small details previously overlooked.
Agatha's pulse quickened, not with fear,
but with the familiar thrill of unfolding mystery. Villagers began murmuring quietly among themselves, speculating in hushed tones. Mrs. Pritchard clutched her ribbon nervously, muttering about someone's audacity, while Mr. Tilling inspected the soil around nearby flower beds for signs of disturbance. Even Sophie Henderson, normally composed, appeared flustered, glancing anxiously toward Victor, who remained calm yet inscrutable. leaning against the greenhouse frame with an intensity that made Agatha watch closely. Each face reflected a mixture of surprise, concern, and subtle accusation. Agatha moved methodically, scanning the ground and noting the faint footprints she had seen the night before. They led toward a narrow path between the rose border and the greenhouse, pressed into the damp soil in a way that suggested careful, deliberate passage rather than a hurried flight. Her eyes fell on a small, broken trowel lying at the edge of a flower bed, mud clinging to its worn handle. She recognized it immediately from her earlier observations. Its presence here seemed intentional, as if someone wanted it found. Near the greenhouse, a scrap of paper caught her attention, fluttering gently in the breeze. She knelt and retrieved it, smoothing the crease to read the hastily written note. Not everything is as it seems. Agatha's mind raced. Between this and the anonymous tip from the garden party, a pattern was emerging. The clues were converging: footprints, broken trowel, gloves seen the night before, and these cryptic notes. Each detail seemed minor on its own, yet together they painted a deliberate and carefully orchestrated scenario. Her gaze swept over Victor, who continued to observe the reactions of other villagers with his characteristic calm, his hands clasped behind his back. He moved toward a cluster of competitors, nodding politely, but saying little.
Agatha noted the precision of his posture, the way he assessed each expression.
The scene confirmed what she had suspected. The missing orchid was not a random act. It carried intention, stakes, and perhaps hidden motives beyond mere rivalry. She stepped back, taking in the scene as a whole, the anxious murmurs, the careful handling of other displays, the subtle glances exchanged between villagers. Carsely's Flower Show had transformed overnight from a charming competition into a puzzle of intrigue.
Agatha's mind catalogued every small detail, mentally connecting the thread.
This was a mystery that demanded careful observation, patience, and quiet reasoning. By the time the village organizer arrived to formally announce the orchid's disappearance, Agatha had already formulated a preliminary theory. Whoever had taken it had planned meticulously, moved deliberately, and left just enough evidence to mislead or challenge any observer. The stakes were higher now, and the cozy charm of the flower show was tinged with quiet tension. Agatha smiled faintly, notebook in hand. The hunt was on, and she intended to follow the trail, one clue at a time, until the mystery revealed itself beneath the blooms. Chapter 5. Secrets in Full Bloom. Agatha Raisin strolled through the village square, notebook in hand, her eyes scanning the small clusters of villagers gathered near the flower show tents. The missing orchid had cast a quiet shadow over Carsely, and Agatha intended to gather as much information as possible before the gossip spun further out of control. She approached Mrs. Pritchard first, who was fussing with a lace handkerchief and muttering under her breath about careless neighbours. "Good morning, Mrs. Pritchard," Agatha began with a polite smile. "I wanted to ask about your morning. Did you notice anything unusual?" Mrs. Pritchard's eyes narrowed slightly and she straightened her posture.
"Nothing at all, Agatha.
"I was attending to my daisies, as always."
Why do you ask?"
Her tone was clipped, but a faint twitch in her hand betrayed unease. Agatha made a quick note, subtle nervousness, possible overcompensation. Next, she approached Mr. Tilling, who was fussing over his tulips. "Mr. Tilling," Agatha said softly, "you seemed concerned yesterday when the rose was trampled. Did you see anything suspicious?" He shook his head vigorously, adjusting a ribbon with exaggerated care. "No, I was entirely occupied with my own beds. Besides, one shouldn't jump to conclusions about simple accidents." His words were smooth, almost rehearsed, and Agatha noted the overly defensive tone as she moved through the crowd. Agatha observed interactions between villagers. Sophie Henderson fidgeted constantly, glancing toward Victor Lark with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "Did you notice anything odd, Sophie?" Agatha asked gently. Sophie's hands fluttered over her apron, and she glanced down. "Well?"
"I thought I saw someone near the orchid last night, but I can't be sure."
"Perhaps I imagined it. The hesitation, the careful choice of words, indicated more than uncertainty. It suggested caution, or perhaps fear of offending. Agatha scribbled the detail, thinking it might prove significant later. Victor himself was remarkably composed, greeting everyone with his usual calm charm. Agatha approached him casually.
"Victor, it's unfortunate about the missing orchid."
"Did you see anyone near it early this morning?" Victor shook his head, dark eyes steady. "I was attending to the other displays and did not approach the orchids. I trust it will be found soon." His answer was measured, but there was a subtle intensity beneath the surface, a focused observation that Agatha recognized from the greenhouse incident. The villagers' quirks emerged in full display as she continued her inquiries. Mrs. Pritchard frequently tapped her parasol. Mr. Tilling muttered gardening tips under his breath while adjusting ribbons, and young Sophie bit her nails in quiet anxiety.
Agatha made mental notes of every gesture, glance, and evasive answer.
Each movement could reveal motive or opportunity if interpreted carefully. A few whispered comments drifted toward her. Perhaps someone from out of town? "I doubt it. Too precise to be accidental." Agatha recorded the statements and analyzed their tones. She sensed playful misdirection intertwined with genuine concern. Some villagers were clearly testing her reactions, offering small hints while maintaining the veneer of casual conversation. By the end of her rounds, Agatha had compiled a detailed picture: nervous behaviors, vague alibis, subtle rivalries, and small peculiar habits. Each person she interviewed contributed to the intricate web of village life, quirky, charming, yet layered with hidden tension. She closed her notebook and let her eyes drift over the scene. Carsley's quaint exterior belied the quiet intrigue brewing beneath, and Agatha felt the familiar thrill of connecting dots others might overlook. The morning sun climbed higher, casting warm light over the flower displays. Agatha smiled faintly, sensing that the interviews had unearthed both amusement and insight. With careful observation and gentle questioning, she was beginning to see the invisible lines of motive, opportunity, and subtle deception winding through the village. Her investigation was progressing, one conversation, one gesture, and one clever deduction at a time. Agatha Raisin approached the compost heap behind the greenhouse with a quiet sense of purpose. The pile of decomposing leaves, wilted petals, and discarded plant matter exuded the earthy aroma of decay mixed with faint hints of fertilizer, a scent that Agatha had grown to associate with meticulous gardening. Most villagers avoided this corner, seeing only muck and scraps. But Agatha knew that even the lowliest compost could conceal valuable clues. She crouched, careful not to disturb the heap too much, and began sifting through the softened layers. Fingers gloved against the dampness, she moved leaves aside, noting the occasional fragment of a torn seed packet, a splintered twig, and the remnants of yesterday's trampled rose. Each item told a story, but it was a small, folded scrap of paper that immediately caught her eye.
Its edges were ragged, soil smudged the ink slightly, yet the handwriting was unmistakable, slanted, deliberate, and neat.
Victor Lark. Agatha carefully unfolded the label, reading the brief note inscribed, "Keep your eyes on the shadows." A shiver of satisfaction ran through her. Here, in the discarded compost, was tangible evidence that connected Victor to an unusual action during the flower show. She paused to consider its implications. Was this an overlooked clue, left intentionally or accidentally? And what did it signify about the recent disruptions to the displays? She catalogued the compost clue alongside the footprints, the broken trowel, and the anonymous notes she had collected from previous days. A pattern began to emerge, one that suggested careful planning and subtle misdirection. The missing orchid, the trampled rose, the hushed nighttime movements, each piece now linked to this tactile, overlooked location. Agatha's mind buzzed quietly, with analytical excitement. A faint rustling from the far edge of the greenhouse made her glance up, alert but unafraid.
A small bird took flight, startled by her movement, wings fluttering over the remaining blooms.
The morning sun had begun to filter through the greenhouse glass, illuminating droplets of dew on leaves and petals, giving the scene a magical glow. Even the compost heap, in its rough, earthy texture, seemed to sparkle in subtle detail. Agatha appreciated the irony. Hidden among decay lay clarity and insight. She leaned closer, examining the soil around the label. Tiny boot prints pressed faintly into the damp earth, similar in shape to the ones she had observed near the missing orchid. A small smear of mud on a nearby leaf suggested hurried movement, possibly a dropped fragment from gloves she had glimpsed the previous night. Agatha made careful sketches in her notebook, noting how even minor disruptions might reveal the sequence of events. Every smudge, every indent, every texture mattered in the careful reconstruction of the flower show's hidden drama. Agatha's thoughts returned to Victor as she catalogued the clue. His calm demeanor and precise movements contrasted sharply with the subtle chaos she was uncovering. The label in the compost did not accuse him outright, but it hinted at knowledge, involvement, or at the very least, an awareness of events others might overlook. Yet she remained cautious, aware that the garden's intricate social network meant anyone could be hiding motives. Rising from the compost, Agatha brushed soil from her gloves and closed her notebook with a gentle snap. The heap, once merely a pile of refuse, had offered insight, a tactile connection to the mystery threading through the village. Each clue she discovered deepened both the suspense and her analytical satisfaction, inviting her to piece together motives, opportunities, and secrets without prematurely concluding. As she stepped back to survey the greenhouse and the surrounding flower beds, Agatha felt a quiet thrill. The flower show's charm and its hidden tensions were intertwined, and she was steadily unraveling the threads. One scrap of paper in the compost, unassuming and earthy, had become a key to understanding the intricate puzzle, and she was determined to follow every lead with patience, observation, and wit. Chapter 6. Blooming Tensions. Agatha Raisin arrived at the village square mid-morning, notebook in hand, to find an atmosphere markedly different from the cheerful calm she had encountered in previous days. The flower show, once a scene of polite chatter and gentle admiration, had transformed into a subtle battlefield of suspicion. Small groups of villagers huddled together, voices lowered to murmurs, eyes darting toward one another as if weighing unspoken accusations. Mrs. Pritchard's face was a picture of controlled indignation. She whispered sharply to Mr. Tilling about people who have no respect for delicate blooms, while adjusting her gloves with deliberate precision. Mr. Tilling, in turn, muttered under his breath, shaking his head as he fussed with a crooked ribbon on a tulip display. Agatha noted the patterns. Even minor inconveniences, an out-of-place ribbon or a slightly bent stem, were being interpreted as potential evidence of wrongdoing. It was the perfect storm for whispered suspicions, a fertile ground for anxiety to bloom. She wandered past the rose beds, observing subtle confrontations unfold. Young Sophie Henderson clutched her notebook tightly, her eyes wide as she whispered to a friend about someone she had seen acting oddly near the greenhouse the previous evening. The friend nodded eagerly, leaning closer to share their own impressions, though each detail was punctuated with the caution of gossip in a small village. Agatha smiled faintly, recording the observations. Even within the humor of village chatter, tensions were sharpening, each minor accusation layered with implication. Victor Lark, ever the picture of composed charm, drifted gracefully through the crowd. He greeted villagers with a polite nod, yet Agatha detected a subtle intensity in his gaze. His eyes scanned the displays, noting discrepancies others might miss and occasionally pausing to offer encouragement with a measured smile. There was no overt tension in his movements, no sign of agitation, yet something about his manner suggested that he was calculating, weighing both the displays and the villagers themselves. Agatha's curiosity stirred. Victor's calm contrasted. sharply, with the growing anxiety around him, making him simultaneously trustworthy and enigmatic. A small cluster of villagers near the sunflowers had begun an animated debate. Words were exchanged in low tones, a mix of irritation and incredulity. One suggested that someone had deliberately misarranged their plants, while another defended their own display, pointing to innocent mistakes in passing. Agatha observed the gestures, the subtle eye contact, and the way voices faltered when Victor passed nearby. Each interaction was a miniature drama, revealing the complex web of pride, rivalry, and suspicion quietly threading through Carsely. She paused near the edge of the square, jotting notes and making mental connections. The footprints she had traced, the torn label from the compost, and the broken trowel, all aligned with minor inconsistencies in villagers' stories. Each whisper and sideways glance became part of a broader tapestry of tension. Agatha felt a faint thrill. The stage was set for confrontation, but not yet for revelation. As she observed, Mrs. Pritchard marched past, muttering about hidden intentions while adjusting a parasol, and Mr. Tilling muttered back, "Careful what you imply, my dear, or someone might overhear." Agatha chuckled softly, recording the exchange. Even within the tension, the villagers' eccentricities provided amusement, a gentle reminder of the cosy charm of Carsely. The air was thick with expectation, yet calm persisted in its own understated way. Agatha inhaled the mingled scents of soil, roses, and sun-warmed leaves, letting them sharpen her focus. Every glance, every murmur, and every small confrontation contributed to her understanding of the village's social dynamics. Tensions were high, yet they were tempered by humor, routine, and the quiet resilience of the villagers. By the time she retreated to a bench near the greenhouse, Agatha had a clear sense of the current state of affairs. Suspicion was blooming like the flowers themselves, and each villager carried both a story and a potential secret. Victor's enigmatic presence loomed as a focal point in her observation. With subtle foreshadowing, the threads of anxiety, accusation, and curiosity intertwined, leaving Agatha poised for the next stage of her investigation, a careful, deliberate unraveling of motives hidden beneath Carsely's charming exterior. Agatha Raisin arrived early at the flower show finale, carrying her notebook and a discreet pair of binoculars. The morning air was crisp and sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows across the vibrant displays. She positioned herself near a rose trellis, an ideal vantage point from which to observe the final interactions without drawing attention. Her heart thrummed with anticipation, not from fear, but from the subtle thrill of watching the village's social dynamics unfold. Villagers began trickling in, their faces bright with polite excitement, but underlaid with curiosity. Conversations were lively yet cautious, each person measuring words and gestures carefully. Agatha's eyes swept across the meticulously arranged flowers, noting every detail. A ribbon slightly askew here, a leaf bent unnaturally there. Minor inconsistencies that to anyone else would seem trivial, but to her spoke volumes. These tiny discrepancies suggested deliberate interference, small acts meant to mislead or test observers. Victor Lark moved elegantly among the displays, greeting competitors with measured politeness, yet his eyes flickered with careful calculation. He lingered briefly over a lavender display, straightening a stalk that seemed already perfectly aligned, then glanced toward the crowd with a faint, knowing smile. Agatha noted the subtlety of his movements, precise, almost choreographed, as if he were orchestrating attention without forcing it. Every gesture became a potential clue, each pause a signal to be interpreted. Nearby, Mrs. Pritchard fussed over her tulip arrangement, muttering under her breath about sloppiness and careless hands. Mr. Tilling hovered close, adjusting ribbons in exaggerated precision, casting fleeting glances at neighbors' displays. Agatha recorded these interactions, noting the undercurrent of rivalry, pride, and subtle accusations that rippled through the crowd. Even the most seemingly innocuous gestures, an overlong handshake, a lingering comment, held potential significance. Agatha's attention returned to the rose bed that had caused so much earlier commotion. A ribbon was slightly off-center, and a cluster of petals appeared displaced, almost imperceptibly. Kneeling slightly, she observed faint impressions in the soil, matching the tiny footprints she had recorded days before. The broken trowel, previously found near the greenhouse, was again visible, partially concealed behind a decorative planter. The pieces were aligning in her mind, the threads of small disruptions forming a coherent pattern that hinted at deliberate tampering. She noticed subtle shifts in villagers' behavior as the finale progressed. Whispers passed like ripples through the crowd. Eyes darted toward certain displays, and minor disputes over spacing and arrangement flared momentarily before being swallowed by polite apologies. Agatha's notebook filled with sketches, observations, and careful deductions, each page bringing her closer to understanding the motives behind the incidents. Victor's calm demeanor contrasted with the quiet agitation around him. He moved gracefully from one competitor to another, offering compliments and minor corrections, never raising suspicion yet drawing attention to himself through subtle acts of precision. Agatha realized the pattern: small interferences, minor disruptions, and carefully timed gestures, all orchestrated to test reactions, observe behavior, and possibly divert attention from the central objective. As the crowd gathered near the judging table, Agatha's mind raced, connecting footprints, torn labels, misaligned ribbons, and subtle behavioral cues. The flower show had become a stage for a quiet, intricate game, and she was watching the moves unfold with analytical delight. Each villager's actions now carried double meaning, revealing both character and potential involvement. By the time the final announcements began, Agatha felt a surge of satisfaction. Her quiet observation had provided the clarity she sought. Patterns were visible, intentions hinted at, and small clues were aligning into a discernible picture. The garden showdown had achieved its purpose, not through confrontation, but through attentive observation, careful deduction, and patience. She smiled faintly, knowing that the revelation was near, and that the culmination of days of careful investigation would soon bring resolution to Carsely's Flower Show mystery. Chapter 7. The Culprit Among Us. Agatha Raisin stood in the warm, book-lined parlour of her cottage, the fireplace casting a gentle glow across the room. The flower show suspects had gathered, arranged in a semicircle of polite discomfort. Mrs. Pritchard fidgeted with her gloves. Mr. Tilling adjusted his waistcoat nervously, and Sophie Henderson perched on the edge of a chair, eyes wide with curiosity. Victor Lark leaned casually against a bookshelf, a faint smile playing at his lips, his presence calm, yet magnetic. "Thank you all for coming," Agatha began, her tone cordial, yet firm. "I've spent the past several days observing events surrounding the flower show. There have been disruptions, missing blooms, and unusual activity."
"I think it's time to review what we know," she paused, allowing her words to settle, watching the subtle exchange of glances.
Every person in the room shifted slightly, their expressions ranging from mild amusement to barely concealed anxiety. Agatha began her recounting systematically. First, the trampled rose during the garden party. Footprints indicated deliberate placement, not mere accident. Mrs. Pritchard gasped softly, her parasol tapping the floor, while Mr. Tilling's eyebrows rose in mild surprise. "Then the missing orchid," Agatha continued, producing her notebook and displaying a small sketch of the pedestal. "Notice how subtle signs, small misalignments, and traces of gloves were all left behind." A hush fell over the room. Even Victor's eyes flickered briefly, as though measuring reactions. Agatha moved closer to the group, noting the minor gestures, Sophie biting her lip, Mrs. Pritchard adjusting her scarf nervously, Mr. Tilling shuffling his papers. Each movement was a potential clue. She allowed a pause, letting the suspense build naturally, ensuring that each subtle reaction spoke louder than words. "During my observations," Agatha said, her voice steady and slightly amused. I noticed patterns of interference, ribbons slightly askew, footprints in unexpected locations, even scraps of paper with cryptic notes, and of course the torn label found in the compost, written in a hand some of you may recognize. Eyes shifted toward Victor, who remained composed, though a faint tightening of his jaw betrayed a flicker of tension. She continued, "Some of you displayed nervousness, hesitation, and curious explanations. These reactions, when combined with tangible clues, help narrow our understanding of what really occurred." A few murmurs spread among the group, yet each person kept polite decorum. Unwilling to voice outright accusations in the parlour's cosy confines, Agatha allowed a slight smile. "I appreciate the honesty of those who admitted small errors or lapses in observation. Every minor act matters in a competition such as this." Sophie whispered something under her breath, earning a knowing glance from Mrs. Pritchard, whose parasol tapped the floor in subtle frustration. The interplay of human quirks, embarrassment, and curiosity filled the room with a delicate tension. She shifted her gaze to Victor once more. "And then there are those whose actions were precise, measured, and deliberate. Observing behavior alone may not tell the full story, but when combined with other evidence, it paints a clearer picture." A faint chuckle escaped Agatha as she gestured toward the various minor interferences in the gardens, each small disruption now part of a coherent sequence of events. By the end of her detailed review, the atmosphere in the parlour was thick with anticipation. Villagers exchanged tentative glances, some faces flushed, some eyebrows raised, while Victor's calm presence served as a subtle anchor amid the undercurrent of tension. Agatha's methodical approach allowed the audience and the suspects to engage fully with the unravelling mystery, teasing out suspicions, minor confessions, and unexpected reactions. Finally, she folded her notebook, letting a pause linger in the warm glow of the parlour. The threads were woven together, patterns visible, yet the final revelation remained just beyond the room's collective gaze. Suspense hung gently, cushioned by humour, charm, and cosy familiarity, preparing all for the impending resolution, the moment when truth would bloom in Carsely's Flower Show saga. Agatha Raisin folded her notebook neatly and looked around the parlour, the warmth of the fireplace reflecting softly on the polished wooden floors. The villagers sat in expectant silence, a mixture of curiosity, relief, and residual tension hanging in the air. Even Victor Lark's calm composure now held a faint note of anticipation, as though he, too, sensed the final pieces of the puzzle were about to fall into place. "Thank you all for your patience," Agatha began, her tone gentle but firm. "We've reviewed behaviours, clues, and subtle interactions from the flower show. It's time for honesty, time to acknowledge actions and motives, not just observations." She paused, letting the words sink in, giving each person a moment to meet her gaze. Sophie Henderson fidgeted with her notebook, then raised her hand shyly.
I might know something about the missing orchid," she stammered. Agatha nodded encouragingly, allowing the girl to continue.
Sophie admitted seeing someone near the greenhouse late at night, but hesitated before naming a person directly.
"I thought it was Victor, but I'm not sure."
"I only saw shadows and gloves." Her confession elicited soft murmurs, and Agatha made a careful note, her expression inviting honesty without pressure. Mrs. Pritchard sighed and tapped her parasol on the floor. "Well, I may have contributed unintentionally," she said, her voice tight with embarrassment.
"I moved a few plants to straighten ribbons, and oh dear, I suppose some petals were disturbed. I didn't realize it would cause so much confusion." There were polite chuckles among the group,
the tension easing slightly as minor mistakes came to light. Agatha's gaze then shifted to Mr. Tilling. "And you, Mr. Tilling? Any truth to share?" He cleared his throat, adjusting his waistcoat.
"I may have
rearranged a few stems to ensure symmetry."
"Nothing else, I assure you."
A ripple of amusement passed through the room, and Agatha smiled. The villagers' quirks and eccentricities, though a source of prior tension, now contributed to gentle laughter, restoring a sense of warmth and camaraderie. Finally, Agatha turned to Victor. Now the more deliberate actions, the pieces that required awareness and intention.
Can we speak openly?
Victor's eyes met hers, steady and calm. He inhaled and nodded, acknowledging the moment.
Yes, Agatha.
I admit I moved certain plants and made subtle adjustments during the show. My aim was not harm, but to observe reactions, to understand the dynamics of a competition in a village as intricate as Carsely. I misjudged how my interventions might be perceived. Gasps of mild surprise mingled with laughter.
Agatha stepped closer, her eyes twinkling.
So Victor's intentions were curiosity and perhaps ambition, but not malice, she said, softening the moment with her signature blend of humour and insight. The villagers nodded, relief and amusement blending seamlessly as the final tension melted. Victor continued, adding a subtle twist. I confess I did envy some of the blooms. I am a horticulturist after all, but I never intended to harm anyone's work. The torn label, the compost clue, it was meant to provoke observation, not suspicion. Agatha chuckled softly, appreciating the blend of honesty, subtle mischief, and humanity in his explanation. With the confessions complete,
Agatha summarized the events, connecting motives, actions,
and misunderstandings in clear, gentle terms. The room's atmosphere shifted entirely. Laughter replaced murmurs, playful teasing replaced whispered doubts, and the charm of Carsely's Flower Show returned in full bloom. The villagers collectively exhaled, a sense of harmony restored as the final threads of the mystery aligned. Agatha allowed herself a small smile. The puzzle had been solved with patience, observation, and tact. Each confession revealed human quirks, ambitions, and errors, leaving no one humiliated, only enlightened. The Flower Show's harmony was intact once more, and the cozy, playful rhythm of village life returned, carrying with it the warmth of resolution and the comfort of shared laughter. Chapter 8. Petals and Peace Restored. Agatha Raisin strolled through the village square as the flower show drew to its cheerful conclusion. The morning sun bathed the stone cottages in a warm glow, and the scent of freshly cut blooms mingled with the crisp air. Villagers milled about with contented smiles, congratulating one another and sharing light-hearted laughter over minor mishaps from earlier in the week. Tables laden with ribbons, trophies, and delicate pastries created a scene of jubilant camaraderie, the tension of the past days now replaced with festive harmony. Agatha paused near the rose display, observing the interactions between the competitors. Mrs. Pritchard and Mr. Tilling, previously caught in a tangle of polite rivalry, exchanged animated congratulations, their faces flushed with good-natured amusement. Children darted between flower beds, chasing one another and giggling at the petals that clung to their shoes. Even Sophie Henderson, notebook tucked under her arm, laughed freely as she recounted her earlier observations to a friend.
Agatha's lips curved in a faint smile.
The village was alive with warmth and gentle energy once more. She made her way to the judging table where the awards were being distributed. The rare orchid, now safely returned to its rightful display, received admiration from all present, including Victor Lark. He accepted the gentle applause with a modest bow, his earlier enigmatic aura softened by the light of understanding. Agatha noted the subtle shift in perception among the villagers. Victor's actions, once mysterious and slightly unnerving, were now viewed in the context of curiosity and professional thoroughness rather than malice. The man's charm had been proven genuine, and his integrity acknowledged quietly among friends. As ribbons were pinned to prize-winning flowers, Agatha reflected on the series of clues that had led to resolution. The compost label, the misaligned ribbons, the broken trowel, and the careful observation of villagers' behavior, all pieces had fallen neatly into place. She considered the intricacies of human nature revealed through these seemingly trivial incidents, pride, envy, humor, and the gentle quirks that defined Carsely's residents. Every moment, every interaction had contributed to the tapestry of mystery, and each revelation had been met with tact, patience, and understanding. A breeze rustled through the flower beds, carrying with it the mingled scents of lavender, roses, and freshly turned soil.
Agatha inhaled deeply, savouring the sensory richness of the village she so loved.
Her mind wandered to the subtle humour she had noted over the days. Mr. Tilling's exaggerated hand gestures when defending a petal, Mrs. Pritchard's dramatic sighs, and the children's innocent mischief. These details, so small and fleeting, now formed the joyful backdrop to a mystery well resolved. Enhancing both her satisfaction and her amusement, she paused by the lavender stand, sketching quick notes in her notebook, not for investigation this time, but for reflection. The flower show had offered more than just competition. It had revealed character, tested observation, and highlighted the interconnectedness of a village community. Agatha appreciated how each person's actions, from the subtle to the overt, had shaped the story's progression. The satisfaction of understanding the narrative in its entirety filled her with quiet pleasure. As the awards ceremony concluded, villagers gathered for shared photographs, laughter echoing through the square.
Agatha watched as Victor exchanged light-hearted banter with neighbours. His earlier intensity softened into genuine friendliness.
She noted the communal pride, the warmth of restored harmony, and the gentle relief that the flower show's small dramas had been fully reconciled. With a final glance around the sunlit village square,
Agatha felt the comforting rhythm of Carsely life settle once more.
The flowers bloomed in ordered beauty, the villagers' spirits were light, and the small, intricate mysteries of the week had been gently unravelled. She allowed herself a contented sigh, knowing that for now, peace and pleasure had returned to the village she cherished. Agatha Raisin stepped into her cottage as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft golden glow across the village of Carsely. The day's excitement had faded into a gentle calm, leaving the streets peaceful and the air fragrant with the lingering scent of roses, lavender, and freshly turned earth. She closed the door behind her with a quiet click, letting the comforting warmth of home envelop her as she hung her coat and settled her hat on the stand. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, sending flickering shadows across the walls lined with books and mementos of past adventures.
Agatha placed her notebook on the small writing desk.
Pens and sketches still scattered about from her meticulous observations throughout the flower show. She poured herself a steaming cup of Earl Grey, the fragrant steam curling upward as she inhaled deeply, savouring both the warmth and the familiar ritual. The gentle rhythm of the room, the soft ticking of the clock, the distant chirp of evening birds, the occasional creak of settling floorboards offered a serene counterpoint to the week's events. From the window,
Agatha watched the village under the deepening twilight.
Stone cottages glowed softly in lamplight, and gardens, now quiet, held the rich scents and colours of the day's blooms. She imagined Victor walking home along the winding lanes, a quiet smile on his face, perhaps reflecting on the same gentle triumphs and minor human follies that had amused her throughout the week. Children had long since disappeared indoors, their laughter now a warm memory, and the cobbled streets seemed wrapped in a serene hush. Sitting by the fire, Agatha allowed her mind to wander, reviewing the subtle threads of the flower show mystery. She traced each clue, each deliberate misstep, and the small human quirks that had guided her to understanding. The torn compost label, the misaligned ribbons, the shadowy gloves, and the carefully observed interactions had all led to resolution. Even Victor's charming interventions now appeared in full context, revealing the balance between curiosity, ambition, and genuine respect for the village's traditions. Her gaze fell upon a small potted plant by the windowsill, a delicate orchid she had brought home from the flower show. Its petals reflected the warm firelight, and she smiled at the quiet beauty of it. This single bloom was a reminder that life, like the mysteries she pursued, required careful attention, patience, and an appreciation for subtle details. She sipped her tea and felt the lingering satisfaction of a story neatly resolved, the gentle pleasure of community, and the soft thrill of her own investigative insight. As night settled fully over Carsely, Agatha pulled a blanket around her shoulders and opened the window just enough to let in the cool scent of evening air. The moon hung low, casting silver light over the village gardens, where petals glimmered faintly in the quiet. Somewhere nearby, an owl called softly, and the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind created a soothing symphony of nocturnal life. Agatha's eyes twinkled with quiet amusement as she considered future possibilities. There would always be another small mystery, another curious thread to follow, another chance to observe the delicate balance of human nature and village life. Finishing her tea, she set the cup aside and glanced at the notebook on the desk. The pages were filled with notes, sketches, and subtle reminders of past intrigues. Agatha leaned back in her chair, letting the soft firelight warm her face. In the calm of the evening, with Carsely asleep outside, she felt the perfect blend of contentment, curiosity, and gentle anticipation. The village had returned to peace, yet the promise of tomorrow and the next adventure lingered in her thoughts like a whisper among the moonlit petals. With a final, satisfied sigh, Agatha closed her eyes for a moment, imagining the quiet paths of Carsely under starlight, the faint scent of flowers and the soft, comforting knowledge that the village's charm, mysteries and laughter would continue to bloom, ready for her next keen observation.